So welcome, different sides of the world. We have Flavio Cannistrà in Italy and Michael Hoyt in the west coast of America, and me here in Australia. Sadly, Matthew has been called out to attend to some food poisoning, which is very sad, but he sends his apologies. But welcome, gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you, Richard.
That's beautiful. Now, we are here. It's really a celebration. This is why I wanted to get you guys in, because it's not a brand new thing, but this beautiful book that Flavio and his friend Federico put forward a few years ago, Single Session Therapy, Practice and Principles, is now in English. So we want to celebrate it and remind everybody, and of course, make them very keen to go out and purchase the book. So Flavio, this production now in the English version, how has that come about? And have you made any changes to the book, or is it just a straight translation? Tell us a little bit about where we're at now with the book.
So, first of all, thank you, Richard. It's an honor to be here with you, with Michael, which really gives a great contribution to the book with his chapter and with his expertise. And so the book is basically what we written in 2018. It's basically the same. We just add some new parts in the bibliography, in the references. We just update something, but basically it's what we wrote 3 years ago, because what we meant was to create a book that can be a guide for the practitioner to have an introduction to principles and practice of single session therapy. I think it's still good after 3 years. It's not old yet, so we basically haven't to change anything. It talks about history and theory and guidelines. We try to give the right space to who help us to elaborate our method and our ideas, which are Michael Hoyt, of course, and Bob Rosamond and Michelle Talmon's method, and in California, and Jeff Young and Burberry Center method in Australia, and Monte Bobil and Harold's Life method in Texas and Canada. And then we explore our method, and we talk about some case examples. It's a very rich book, but very practical, and which, as I say, a path that you can follow from the start, from the beginning to the end, to be completely involved in single session therapy.
Yeah,
let me jump in.
No, you jump in there. Right here. Jump in there. But let me say a word about you first, Michael, because when Flavio says that Michael did this and did that, we're talking about that, Michael, you are really one of the originators of this whole thinking.
That's what I was just going to say.
Yeah, it's not new. You've been doing this for a while. So please, and Flavio has no hesitation to say he is your student. So let me just elevate you before you begin speaking to the grandfather of this whole thing.
So many years ago, in the late 1980s in Northern California, Moshe Talmon and Bob Rosenbaum and I were working at a clinic, and Moshe had noticed that a lot of the patients only came one time. And he thought they must be upset, they must be angry, there must be some problem. And then he looked at a lot of the data from the clinic, and this was true across all the different therapists, the child therapist, the family therapist, the adult therapist, the psychodynamic therapist, the cognitive behavioral therapist, the family systems therapist, and said, maybe one session, we ought to investigate this. It seems it's very common. And so we got together and did this research project, and we approached a lot of first, we pulled a couple hundred charts and called patients and found out why they had only come once, and most were happy. And then we decided to do a prospective study where we approached our organization. So we'd like to study the possibility of one session therapy. When people come in, we'll say, maybe we can do it in one. Are you interested in that, And this is what resulted, that we found majority of people wanted one session, found it adequate, just what they wanted, even though more were available. The great majority of those on follow-ups said that it had been very beneficial. And many reported secondary benefits. Not only am I getting better, less anxious, but I'm doing better at work, or not only am I getting along better with my spouse, but I'm also sleeping better, different other, what we call ripple effects, benefits. And it was not an experiment, but it was we did not randomly assign people to one session or longer. With everyone, we said, let's see what we can get done today. Maybe one session will be enough. Are you interested in that? And we found, even though it wasn't an experimental assignment, there was no difference in outcomes between the people that continued and the people that only had the one session. Now, one of the things that I find fascinating about this, I just want to say, I've mentioned this already when we were warming up, but I woke up this morning thinking about this, that we were going to meet today, and Flavio's in Rome, and you're in Sydney, and I'm here in Northern California near San Francisco, and that we would be communicating around the world. When Bob and Moshe and I did this study in 1988 to 1990, and the first book came out, Moshe Talmud, 1990, and then some articles, no one had the idea that we would have 3 large international conferences. We would be talking all around the world about this. There'd be many, many, many studies since. So when you said a few minutes ago that Flavio is some way my student, in some ways that may be true. He's studied some of the things I've been doing, but we're really colleagues. And what to me is so amazing is that, what do they say, from little acorns, big oaks grow. And we had this idea way back when, and now he's doing research in Italy, and we're going to have a conference someday in Italy, and research in Canada, and research in New Zealand, and research in Australia with the Bouverie Center and other people in Melbourne and all around. So to me, this whole thing is just like, wow, how did this happen? I thought we were doing a little research project. They made me the principal investigator because I had published 2 or 3 articles, and they thought maybe we'll get the grant if Michael's name is first. Yes. That was the idea. And, since we've all written lots of books and dozens of articles, it's really quite a wonderful thing. And when I got this book in Italian a couple of years ago, I was just so thrilled. This is like, oh, wow, look at this. And here's the, they spelled my name right. That's good. Oh, good. Yeah. But not just the history, but look at all this and the developments in the different places in Australia and how they're doing it in Italy. And so I just think this whole thing is a wonderful. The basic finding is that one session can help lots of people, not everybody, not all the time, but given a choice, many people want to come for one session and find it beneficial. Everything we've done since is figuring out who are those people, how to make it work for more people. It's important to recognize that it was the patients who invented single session therapy. They were the ones coming for one session. And we're trying to figure out what makes those sessions work for those people and how to make it work for more people.
Well, let's dig down a little bit into some of that stuff, which of course the book does. It's beautiful. I'm looking through, a number of chapters, 8 or 9 chapters, and each divided into interesting areas. And a few things that caught my eye, I'd love you to talk about. And you're just touching on it there, Michael. But you have a section that discusses the single session mindset. So this mindset that the what is it? The patient possesses it, the therapist possesses it. What are some of just to expand a bit about that the nature of the
I am so glad that you're asking that question, because in the new book that just came out in English, one of the best chapters in the book is by Flavio on the vital role of the therapist mindset.
Yeah.
Take it, Flavio.
I'm quite proud of and honored of that chapter, which is in the book Single Session Thinking and Practice in Global, Cultural and Familial Contexts, edited by Michael Hoyt, Jeff Young, and Pam Rycroft. And in that book, I developed something we talk, of course, in our book, and which basically is developed in every single book about single session therapy. In every single book about single session therapy, you can find something about the mindset, because the therapist mindset at first, because the therapist mindset, the idea that one single session can be enough, can be useful, maybe not to resolve a problem, maybe to help the client to have some strategy or a space in which he or she can find a feedback, a confrontation with the therapist. Well, this kind of mindset that put the therapist in the position to try to do something useful and enough for the client is what can mostly make a single session possible. Because if you approach to a therapy session, every therapy session, the first one, the second one, or over and over, with the idea that 1 is not enough, 2 is not enough, 5 is not enough, you will probably have right. You will need more and more session. In my chapter in the single session thinking book, I talk about a construct which is the flying into health, which is a construct developed in psychoanalysis, in which when a client come back in the second or third session or fourth session saying, "Hey, doctor, I'm good, I feel good, I don't have any symptom anymore," the doctor say, "Oh, no, this is a fly in the health. You can't be healthy now because my theory say that you can't, so this is impossible." And in single session therapy, in a way, the therapists adopt a different theory, but it's more appropriate to say a different mindset. The mindset that say that maybe 1 is enough. And if not, you simply have any other session to accomplish your goal, to help the client.
And Michael, this is something when we've discussed it, you've said to me that certainly single session is the possibility, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to get everything done in one session, and you're failing if you go into 2. So there's a scope in the whole process that
I think that's
still
a very
about the client.
useful and important point. We're not saying only one session, but one at a time. You approach each session as though it might be the only. You might say to the person, "Are you interested in seeing if we can get enough done today that you may feel it's all you needed was to come this one time?" "Oh yeah, I'd be interested in that." Flavio mentioned the therapist mindset. Something we have not talked much about in the literature yet is the client's mindset. And I think clients come in wanting help now. If you say, "Oh, I think you need to come once a week for a year," that many, I only need some help figuring out how to discipline my kid, or how to sleep better, or how to get along with my partner, or how to stop drinking, or they may not want to come every week or twice a week or whatever. So I think in some ways, we're capitalizing on the mindset of the client, who's oftentimes is ready to do something. It's not just getting an idea, but are you willing to apply it? How will you use this? There's been a lot of discussion about theory, whether this theory, the mindset is determined, or the attitude is another word for it, or the perspective is determined by the theory. Our friend Bill O'Hanlon and another guy named Jim Wilk, way back in 1987, wrote a book, and part of it was very funny when they talked about single session therapies. And they said somebody can always question it, because they can say, "Well, it worked in practice, but does it work in theory?" Like somehow, so what if you got good results and the person's happy and they don't seem to have a flight into health, meaning they're going to be having all the same problems in 3 weeks? It lasts, it benefits them. What do they know? They're only the patient. I'm the doctor. I should decide. I'm trying to be facetious, where the customer is right, and particularly since therapy is largely getting people to use their own skills and resources. It's not us doing something to them, putting it into them. How many doses do you need before you'll have enough?
Yes, this interplay is, of course, has been talked about more and more. The client-therapist relationship, but certainly as it goes through, and in the book here, there is an attempt to give you some frameworks. And I noticed here, which caught my eye, was that there are 3 methods. And perhaps we could talk about that for a moment, and then, but also additionally, that's developed and sort of evolved it itself. And there's an Italian method. Can we just have a brief discussion about these methods? Perhaps start with you, Michael, and then Flavio talk about the changes that developed and grew into the Italian method. I'm fascinated by developments that the theorists make. Yeah.
Well, you know, one of the things that started us off back in the late 1980s, I was very involved with something called redecision therapy. It was Bob and Mary Goulding. It was a form of TA Gestalt therapy that they had invented. Moshe had just finished doing some work with Salvador Minuchin, and he knew Minuchin quite well in family therapy. Bob was very interested in lots of things, as he always has been, including Ericksonian hypnosis. So we came to it without one method. Single session therapy, there's certain methods that seem more useful: solution focus, narrative, some strategic, some Ericksonian ideas. Those are useful. But we came to it with the idea of single session therapy is really a delivery model. It's going to be one session. And then the therapist can do lots of things within that one session. The first cases of single session therapy that we could find in the literature were reported by somebody called Sigmund Freud.
That guy, yeah.
That guy, yeah, you know, and there were single sessions with Gustav Mahler, the famous composer. They were both in Leiden, Holland at the same time. Mahler said, "Can I have a meeting with you?" And they walked around the canals for a few hours talking about Mahler's problems with his wife. And it seemed to fix problems or help him a whole bunch. Another, Freud was in the Alps on vacation with his family, and there was a teenage girl, Katerina, and she was the innkeeper's daughter, and she had some emotional problems. And Herr Freud, Dr. Freud, may I speak to you? And they had a meeting. It was one session. So it started, if you want, psychodynamically. And when you read the literature, there's every approach you can think of. There's EMDR, and there's Gestalt therapy, and there's psychodynamics and cognitive behavioral and different forms of strategic therapy. So I'm interested to hear about the Italian method and the other methods, because I'm making an argument that while certain methods are more useful and they're more empowering of the clients, we see successes with all sorts of different approaches, theories, methods. And so I'm a little concerned I don't mean to pick on the Italian method or the Australian method or the Hayward, California method. That's where we did our original research in California, but rather that whatever works and different strokes for different folks, different things might work with different people. But
yes, we do have to start somewhere. The springboard. Yes, and this I agree with you, Michael. I say this a lot too. That these methods, these knowledge bases are some people settle into them and sink into them like the answer to everything, as different from springboards that go forward. And obviously things have been springboarding. So Flavio, this development, how did you start to expand? What were the expansions that you started to find needed to be added? Or I'm rambling. Best go over to you. You tell us.
So first of all, I want to clear that in the book we describe these three methods, and we use the word method for a clear purpose. That are the methods that influenced us. And what we learn from literature from Hoyt, and Rosenbaum, and Monty Bobel's Live, and Jeff Young Bury Center. But there are, as Michael said, there are possibly a lot of methods. I could quote Martin Soderquist or Jessica Schlader in New York, or Wendy Dryden, or Ost in the North Europe. So it's a service delivery, as Michael said. And this is the beautiful thing about single session therapy. You can do it in a lot of different ways. And we choose the word method in our book. We did this choose, not all the others talk about methods, for example, because we think it's better than approach or theoretical orientation. Method is more similar, well, method, the word method in Italian is more similar to guidelines, structured guidelines that help you to achieve a purpose, a goal, okay? And in the Italian method, what we do is to take from the Monty Bobbles and Arnold's Life method, the strategic part, to go to find the attempted solution of the client that maintain him or her in the problematic situation. And in the Jeff Young Bury Center method, we go to take the emphasis on the resources, emphasis on what work, and the idea of a very structured method. When I went in Australia to learn at Bury Center the method, I found something very structured with very precise steps to do, and this is what we take from him. And from Michael Hoyt, and I went at first in California to learn from Michael Hoyt, we take the great emphasis on the person, to put the person at the center, to consider every single person unique, and to find a way to meet the person with her resources and with her ideas to how therapy can work in his view. So I think that the Italian method is a mix of these three ways to do single session therapy. Not very original in a way, very functional, and we also put a different emphasis on communication. This is because we needed to adapt what we learn around the world for the Italian culture, That's basically what we do. In a way, on a side to block what doesn't work, and on the other side to put the person at the center and enlarge their resources in helping the therapists with a very structured method.
And I think that there's an interesting analogy and metaphor that I've often used with this, is actually going back to early days of songwriting of the greats Carole King, Neil Sedaka, and those guys. And they would just, be thrown into a room and say, don't come out until you have a hit record, to have a hit song. And so sometimes they would have this amazing, creative, totally unique experience, but other times they would get stuck. And so they would just go back to a few basic chords, their sort of familiar chord pattern, which I could relate to being a method. And then from that emerged these extraordinary, totally unique and improvised melodies, which of course has led to what is a very, very funny comedy routine by a group of comedians who have the 4-chord song, and they play about 30 of these famous songs. But is that the sort of the value of a method, that it gives you a starting point, or gives you a place from which you can reliably move out? What do you think, Mike?
I think, let me read a quotation. The essence of single session thinking is to approach the first session as if it will be the only session, while creating opportunities for further work if it is requested by the client.
Right.
So we're going to try to do this in one. We'll do more if we need them, basically. I think part of it, I've sometimes talked about what I call a context of competence. And I've said that therapy takes place in the context of competence. If you can imagine 3 circles overlapping, and one circle we'll call goals, another we'll call resources, and the third we'll call alliance. We need, whatever the method, we need to find out, what does the client want? What is their goal? How will we know when we can stop meeting like this? What's the target in golf? Where's the hole on the golf course? Different ways of asking it. But where's the goal? What are we trying to get to? I want to be able to go to sleep without being up all night. I want to be able to think about things without getting too emotionally upset. I want to, whatever their goal is. Then we have to ask ourselves, what resources does the client have that they can bring to bear? Exceptions to the problems, talents they may have. Erickson talked about bringing skills from one area into another, generalization, cross competency transfers, that kind of a thing. And then there's the alliance. If people could figure out what they want and how can they solve it on their own, they would not come and see us. So I'll think a lot of the alliance is us helping them figure out where they want to go and how to get there, how they've gotten there in the past, how other people they know have gotten there, how they could get there. And so we're trying to use the alliance, our relationship, largely to inspire them, to encourage them. To use my golf metaphor again, we try to hand them one of their clubs and say, you know, it sounds like that worked pretty well with your boss. Have you thought about doing that with your sister? Well, how would that go? Rather than us telling them what to do, mostly looking for exceptions to the problems, times they've been able to handle things. And so I think the different methods, when I hear about them, because now I've been thinking a lot about strategic therapy and some other different approaches, is trying to ask, so where do they get to, who figures out what the goal is, and how do they find out the client's resources? You know, even the word client, I know in Australia you say client and even consumer, and in a lot of places in the States they still say patient. I'm not sure how it's done in Europe, in Italy or in other places in Europe, but the idea of patient was the medical model, and they have to be patient. They'll tell us what's wrong, and then the doctor will fix it. Be patient.
Be patient.
It comes from Greek and Latin words, patiens, meaning suffering, where the client sounds more egalitarian, more they're a client, they've hired us to do a job, we're working with them. So I think it's important, though, that we try, whatever the method, to help the client figure out how they can get to where they want to go as soon as possible. Maybe in one session, maybe not.
I think there's another thing, Michael, if I can stick with you for a second, because I've had the great pleasure to attend a number of your presentations over the years. So my awareness of this is been enriched by those things. But you also describe a linear, a sort of a sensitivity the therapist. Is it useful for the therapist in looking at the linear progress of a session that gives them an insight into the progress and the comfortability or the success or the effectiveness of what they're doing? Can you expand on that a little bit?
I think there's pre-contemplation. I mean, there's before the therapy begins, when we first meet with the person, what decided you to come now? What's your goal? What problems are you having? When things are better, what does that look like? Then we do change, however we do change, however we try to bring about change, whether it's bringing forth feelings that they have neglected, changing parts of the narrative, helping them see certain strengths they don't have, trying to not allow them to continue the problem. There's different ways of approaching it. Then there's some part later in the session where we're talking about how they're going to apply this in their life, what's the take-home message, the next steps, and then discussing whether this has been enough and how they will use it. This morning, I was reading something that Michael Hoyt, the narrative therapist from Australia, had written, and he talked about it is not just rewriting the text or the narrative, it's the performance of the new text that changes people's lives. So how are you going to use this? What does this mean to you? It's not enough just to say, oh, there's a different way to think about it or look at it, but will they actually embody it? Will they move into it? Will they use it?
Yes, I've got a recent client who's had about 30 years of therapy, and I was absolutely astounded because we did exactly that, because I'd been to Michael Hoyt lectures and I'd been following the process, and also Diane and Decky and Ryan and self-determination theory and so on and so forth, which are fabulous. But this idea of implementing, which is, again, Ernie Rossi talks about that, she found that a totally surprising comment. That she's saying, oh, yes, I've made all these realizations before. And the therapist would say to me, oh, that's wonderful. I'll see you next week. And I said, oh, that's wonderful. We'll put that into your life and that's it. We're done. And it was an extraordinary. So the extraordinary thing is that there are very, very different ways of thinking among therapists. And I think, Flavio, this takes us back to where we sort of, in a bit of a circular round there, of this mindset of the therapist.
Yeah, what you say remind me of a very important thing I learned during the training with Michael, which is to ask to the client what he or she thinks about how he or she can solve his problem. Sometimes as therapists, we think that we need to be smart. Guidelines, correct me if I'm wrong, Michael, guidelines that Michael and his group gave was don't be smart, take your time, make time your friends, and ask to the client what kind of ideas he could develop to solve this problem. This is also developed by Duncan and Miller in the client's theory of change, to ask to the client, what is the cause of the problem from your point of view, and what can solve the problem from your point of view? And to me today, still today, is extraordinary how this can be useful. And usually, in my experience, this can conduct to three kind of answer. An answer that, in your opinion, in your professional opinion, totally fit for what that client needs. And so it just prescribes to the client his own solution. And the second way is when what the client says is very useful, but maybe just needs some adjustment, so you can use your expertise to help him or her to do better what he just proposed. And the third way is something that could happen when the client proposes something that is good, but is not good enough. You know that you need to change something, but you can't propose something that relies on what he says, something that you can grow from what he says. This for me is fantastic, because in our workshop, often we see a therapist that basically says, oh, with that client, I don't know what to do. I don't have the skills and the strategies and the techniques. I need to learn to read many books or to learn some new technique, new intervention. And you say, okay, you can do that. But the first thing that you can do is to ask to the client, what do you think? What do you think that can help? And of course, often the client say, I don't know. You are the doctor, fix me. I don't know. But if you wait a few seconds, you can discover that I don't know often means I need some time to think about that.
So there's a very valuable technique in therapy for therapists to know called putting your lower lip against your upper lip.
Yes.
Shut your mouth for a moment and give the person time to process. But if they say, I don't know, and I say, well, I'm a PhD, here's 23 different things you could try, I read about them, then we're not looking at their strengths. They're not getting the message they have to do anything. I've taken over for them. Get out of the way and I'll hit the shot. I can do it better than you can. Plus, I can do it with tennis or golf. So I think it's very important sometimes, as Flavio says, when somebody says, well, I don't know, you're the doctor. And I go, yeah, I know. I wish I knew more. You're the patient. Tell me what you've tried so far.
So are we both patients in the therapy room, or do we both need to be patient?
Yeah, well, maybe we should be patient and give them a chance to be the client.
Yeah.
I got to write that down. I'll use that.
Oh, God, very good. Me too. I was thinking about. Yes, it's lovely. I was working with my gorgeous wife Susie on a project that she's doing, and she was very frustrated by it, and she made a comment, and I said, "Oh, that's good for my next book," and she said, "Get off your stuff." But now, Flavio,
in the book, what do you think? What's the most exciting thing in the book?
Yeah, great question, Michael. Yeah.
Well, I have no doubt that the most exciting thing is the chapter about the case examples, because when we did that, we contacted I think it's 17 therapists that we trained in single session therapy. And we asked them if they wanted to talk about their cases, so one case each. And in this way, we had 17 different cases of single session therapy made by 70 different therapists. So we have psychologists, but also psychotherapists trained in Gestalt therapy, strategic therapy, familiar therapy. And this is very good because in this way, we can find different kind of approaches applied to single session therapy, different views, different ways to do the same thing to help the client or the client, because there are also couples therapy in just one session. The chapter the most valuable chapter in the book to me, because you learn how to do single session therapy, but you also learn from who practice single session therapy for the first times.
Beautiful.
When you see so many different ways, it gives you a freedom. Which way would work for me? There's more than one way. Many roads lead to Rome, as we say.
Yeah.
So let's flip that question back to you, Michael. Is there a favorite chapter that you have in the book, or are you going to sit on Flavio's shoulders there?
I think Flavio. Well, I like everything.
Brilliant.
Well, no, I do.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
But I agree with Flavio. What to me is most interesting, because I've been in this field a long time, is, what's new? How are people using this? I hadn't thought about doing it that way. That's an interesting way to phrase that. What a good application. Yeah. So I find reading the different examples is kind of the most fun, if you will, for me, thinking, God, 30 years ago, Bob and Moshe and I were running out in the hall and talking to each other. And look at this, people in Italy are doing this now. It's contagious. And, so this idea that different ways people could take some basic ideas and apply them, I think that to me is probably, I would have to say that is the most interesting. There's also less interesting to me, but I think very important. There's issues about implementation and insurance and diagnosis and administrative systems. And can you do this in one session, or do you have to do an intake and then do it in the second session? And do you have to have a diagnosis to get paid? And so there's a lot of levels you have to get through. And I used to find those uninteresting. And then I've edited some books also recently. And I'm doing some consulting with some different systems, a college counseling center and a couple other places. And most of their questions are things like legal questions and medical legal risk and what form to fill out. And it's less the therapy, and a lot of it's the context, but it has to do with the mindset that we've created this idea to be fearful of ourselves, of our patients. Something could go wrong. Everything has to be so signed and countersigned before we do anything. I'm not saying we should be wild or dangerous or anything, but I think if we assume that the clients coming to us are functional human beings who have managed to stay out of our office for 30 or 40 years, they're competent in some areas of their life. It's a better way to approach people rather than they're screwed up, they're going to sue me, and I better not say anything. And
yes, well, that's a really important point, I think, Michael, because I do hear this. I have heard this at conferences where I go to, where I hear people talking as they leave the room from a particular lecture saying, well, I could never do that because there'd be so much paperwork or so on and so forth, which
our colleagues Monty Bobel and Arnie Slive have written about common concerns people have about single session therapy, and one of them is, I'm going to miss something important. And they said, basically, you have to ask, have you been having thoughts about harming yourself, somebody else, or pets? Are you something like that? And if they say yes, then you have to explore it and treat it like you would in any other therapy. But you don't have to ask 200 questions about depression and suicide and all that. ask a few basic ones to see if that's an area you need to explore. But we spend so much time on the intake that several people have written that if the client doesn't come out of the session feeling they got something good from the session, there's not going to be a second session or a third. God, I just went and told my sad story and they made me feel worse than when I started. And then they said, well, I'll see you again next week. We'll pick it up. That's not very therapeutic. So I think trying to find ways to help people experience forward movement. And I think that's to go back to the mindset idea. If we have the idea that the client is going to be able to start making changes now, today, allora, then they will much sooner rather than waiting. Well, we've got to do a complete assessment before we can begin to look at what possibilities, but we better go slow. You know, even when John Weakland used to say to people, go slow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was slow. That was just the co-op resistance, but there was go.
Yeah,
the go was the important one. You're going to do something. It's not enough. You don't want to rush into it, but you also you don't want to just sit there and do nothing. Nothing will get better unless you, as Bill O'Hanlon has said, do one thing different. More of the same doesn't make a change. And everybody is. Not everybody, many people have said something like that. De Shazer, if it works, do more of it. If it doesn't work, do something different. And so I think what we're doing in the single session approach is saying many people come in and they want some help now. They're sort of ready. They've got the right mindset. And we're trying to help them figure out what would be most helpful for them, sometimes from their personal repertoire of what they already have done. Or they can borrow from other family members. I said to one woman, who's your superhero? She said, Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And I said, well, what would Buffy say to your boyfriend? She knew exactly what Buffy would say. And I said, you just got to channel Buffy, don't you? And she laughed and said, I can do that. And so it could be a supernatural figure, or what would Jesus say, or what would Buddha say, or what would, your favorite soccer player or rugby player say. So I think helping the person find their resource, what they can, this hand is telling me this and that other hand is telling me that. Well, which one are you going to listen to? That might be a way to do it.
That's a beautiful thing, and we could go on more and more. I know, but we do have to come to an end sometime. We've noticed our podcasts have a shelf life. We did do a straw poll to people, and we found that was when they finished their commute or their run, their exercise. Or they
so before we finish, I would like
to. But something. Yeah. What's your final things?
If you're a listener, here's my question to you. From what you've heard so far, how might you approach a client differently? Might you say, let's see if we can get it done in one visit, or how have you solved this in the past? What has been useful for you in this so far? And I certainly hope that you will get the English or the Italian version of the new book, because it has so much information in it that I think if you're curious at all, you'll say, wow, I'm really glad I got this book. It's got great stuff in it.
And everyone
thank you.
Moshe Talmud and I wrote the preface. We would call it the foreword in English, but they call it the prefazione in Italian. But the book is really from all the authors who contributed the chapters. And I just encourage people to read it because it's so good.
Well, we will have links in the show notes for people to go there and have a listen and click on and get these books. And so, Flavio, some last words, if there's a thought, something we've missed, or some little summary you would like to leave us with.
Well, I can just say one thing, that in 2023 we will have the 4th symposium, International Symposium on Single Session Therapy. So I hope that in Italy, in Rome, of course, which a lot of people mentioning in this and in the other books, which, let me tell this again, inspired our work and inspire our work still today. So at the next appointment, after this book and other books and other works, me and Michael are also working on a new book. It will be in 2023 in Italy, in Rome, for an appointment we hold for most of the best authors of single session therapy in the world.
Fantastic.
The best way to get that information, would that be just to Google Italian Center for Single Session Therapy? Or is that the...
Yeah, and there is also an English webpage that we created is single session therapists, plural, .com, singlesessiontherapists.com, in which every month we publish articles about single session therapy, which basically are synthesis or like abstracts of research or review of book about single session therapy and something like that. Yeah, beautiful. And we will talk about the symposium in that website.
And we'll have links to that, and we'll have you on again. We'll talk again, getting closer, the end of 22, 23, so that we can talk about the new books and get people really geared up on that. But singlesessiontherapies.com is the place for all us wonderful English-speaking people to go. Gentlemen, I can't thank you enough for being with us, but it's just a great joy for me because you're two of my favorite people, and I miss you. So it's really good. So everybody, for now,
please take care of yourself, get your vaccines, do whatever you have to do, stay healthy, so we can all actually be in the same room again together instead of
this distance. Anyway, for now, we'll see you next time.
Excellent.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.